We'd rather remain in the desert worshiping the golden calf rather than to entering into the land flowing with milk and honey. I mean, that's spot on.
Explain how two people are reading the same Bible, two families, and they're landing in different camps politically.
Some were going through divorces, some were going through custody battles, some were dealing with drunkenness and so on. And I was one of those who just wore my faith on my sleeve.
Friends, Americans, and lovers of freedom, thank you for joining me today on JSlay Made in the USA. I am more humbled and more honored than I have been since I started this journey to have on today's guest, Chad O. Jackson, as you can find him on Instagram, YouTube. Chad, great to have you, brother. You've had a big impact on me. We're going to talk about your documentary. We're going to talk about Uncle Tom too, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, I've got a laundry list of questions to ask you because I didn't want to swing and miss. This is a great opportunity. Okay, so let's start with your background, family upbringing, where you from, and what led you politically to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. So I graduated from Mansfield High School, which is in a town called Mansfield, Texas, back in 2008. It was a year that Obama won his first term, and I was one of those who was completely just on fire for Obama. I remember even skipping school one day, my senior year, to go to one of his rallies when it came to Dallas, Texas. So that's who I was. I grew up in the church, but for me, faith was more something that you were born into rather than something that was your own. But it did become my own after I graduated high school in 2008. And I do remember when I was born again, just asking God to just change my heart, to take possession of my heart and make me His. And He did that, and as a result, I just began to see things a lot differently than I did. And one of those were how I saw kind of America and my place here in America and politics and so on. And so I was challenged by a friend to read the Republican Party platform and the Democrat Party platform, and quickly learned just by reading the two platforms that my views align more with the Republican Party than it did the Democrat Party. Today, I don't really consider myself to be a Republican. I consider myself to be a Christian conservative. I wish to conserve the structure of America laid forth by the founding fathers. And I do believe that the Republican Party, at least as far as its politicians are concerned, has done a very poor job keeping our republic, as Benjamin Franklin said we must do. And so for that reason, I do see myself differently than I do the Republican Party politicians who make up the Senate and Congress. Very few are actually reflecting what this country stands for. They're more interested in politics than they are in preserving this great country of ours. And so for that reason, I don't really consider myself to be a Republican these days. But yeah, so whenever I graduated and became a Christian, I was totally on fire for God.
You're talking about graduating high school, right?
Graduated high school, right?
Right.
I was totally on fire for God, and I wanted to become a pastor. I wanted to work in the church at some capacity. And so I applied to, I did one semester at a college in Texas. It was a secular college, and decided that this wasn't for me. And so I wanted to become a pastor. So I applied at another college, Criswell Bible College in Dallas, and I got accepted there. When it came time to pay tuition, I didn't have the money to pay for it. And so I said, you know what I'll do is I'll go and get a real job and make enough money to then go back and pay my tuition for this Bible college. And so I found this plumbing job. I worked as a plumber's apprentice, and I learned through just working as a plumber's apprentice that this isn't a job. This is a career. Like if I want to make sure that my job is still here tomorrow, I have to put in some effort and actually learn what it is I'm doing and not just be a warm body on this job site here to collect a paycheck. I have to actually put some thought into this. And so I did. And one thing led to another. And I decided, you know what, I'm just going to make a career out of this. Um, what I found, and this is very interesting, is when we were working on these construction sites, um, you're around a lot of men, a lot of grown men, ranging from my age at the time all the way up to their, midlives and even like older gentlemen who all come to work bringing with them various issues, baggage, so on and so forth. Some were going through divorces, some were going through custody battles, some were dealing with drunkenness and so on. And I was one of those who just wore my faith on my sleeve. um, and it was interesting to see how many of these men would come to me one on one and pull me aside and just kind of lay their hearts out to me, like, hey, I'm dealing with this. I know that you're a believer. Would you just pray for me? And it was cool to be in that position and learn that you don't have to be a senior pastor at a mega church to reach people. You can be down in the trenches with real men, um, on a job site and share the love of Christ with these people. And so I quickly learned that, like, it's more important to be in the culture, in society, making a difference. I wouldn't say more important, but it's just as useful to be in that position than it is to be, as it is to be, a pastor. But anyway, so just to kind of cut this short, I was able to ultimately start a plumbing company. Um, I had conservative values because I was very active in Republican politics in Dallas, Texas. That's how the filmmakers of Uncle Tom got my name. They reached out to me one day in 2018, asked if I wanted to sit down for an interview. I agreed to do it. Um, Ended up being in Uncle Tom, which was released last year, and am now working as a writer and an interviewer for Uncle Tom 2, which is to be released fall 2021.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, one of the things that really drew me to you in that first Uncle Tom film, Chad, was you're a regular guy. I mean, it showed you working at your plumbing business. That's how it started. And I love the intro, the way that you open with, I care deeply about Black people. I care deeply about all people. Let's show a little clip from the beginning of Uncle Tom to give people just a general understanding of how that starts. And then I've got some questions for you.
I care deeply about Black people and the issues of Black people. But I care deeply about the issues of all people. I want to look at things objectively. When I look at what policies I believe will help not only Black people, but what would help all people, I voice that. And because I stand in opposition, that makes me an Uncle Tom.
Well, Chad, I've got a question for you. So, you grew up in a traditional Christian Black family, and you guys just voted Democrat your whole life, at least in your childhood. And that seems to be kind of the normal thing. Whereas in a white Christian family, depending on where you're at in the country, but especially maybe in the 90s and 2000s, early 2000s, if you were traditional, white family that were Christians, you probably landed on the Republican side of things because it just made sense with conservative values and all. So explain why that happens. Explain how two people are reading the same Bible, two families, and they're landing in different camps politically.
Well, I think it's important to make the distinction between Black liberalism and then liberalism at large. With Black liberalism, it's liberation from oppression and racism and people trying to hold you back. Whereas liberalism at large is this kind of progressive, there is no God, everything is relative, everything is subjective. And, we should let the little guy kind of have the final say because he's the one who's most oppressed. And so that's kind of like the narrative that a lot of Black people grow up in, where they are conservatives in practice, but they vote for Democrats because of this belief in, in liberation from oppression. The question becomes, well, are you really oppressed? And a lot of Black people are not honest about, answering that question, simply because of the fact that we live in an environment where there's kind of like this milieu. There's kind of this kind of spirit of the age where, anything is racist, anything and everything is racist. How somebody looks at you, how somebody, whether somebody cuts you off or on the street or what have you, everything is racist. And so you there will be no satisfaction until all Black people are treated above and beyond, extraordinary. And so that's kind of like that's one of the things that I believe that the left has been masters at, is kind of establishing, for Black people, what what liberation looks like, and kind of making that something that is always sought after each election cycle.
Let me throw in a question real quick. So when I go back
Yeah.
to the Old Testament, and also not only that, but I learned the term Black liberation theology about 6 years ago, and I learned some things about how the traditional Black church and a Black community is learning the way that they're viewing Scripture. And this thought came to my mind, and it's like, you know what? These are a people who, yes, they have been in the wilderness and they have been oppressed, and they've been in Egypt, oppressed, in slavery. We can prove that. But there's this idea that kind of hit me. It's like, could it be that these people are stuck in the wilderness and they can cross the Jordan, and their songs are about crossing the Jordan, and their songs about the promised land. But now it's almost like the idol has become the struggle. And to remain in that place is kind of where they feel that's where they feel most comfortable, versus actually stepping into freedom, stepping into what is available. But there's megaphones all over the place shouting the message of no, you are oppressed. And I felt like I never saw that more clearly than recently, when things like when they removed Ben Carson's name from I think it was an elementary school or something in Detroit. It's like, here's a guy that had every reason not to succeed, according to the general narrative. Yet he did, and not only did he succeed, I mean, this guy was building reading rooms across the country because he attributed his success to his mom instilling in him a love for reading. So he's like, well, I'm going to take this and spread it. But they're removing his name from a high school. I think it's because of his association with Donald Trump, something like that. Yeah. But really, to me, it's like was a cheap way of saying we can't have those voices out there showing a better way.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect analogy, by the way. How, we'd rather remain in the desert worshiping the golden calf rather than to entering into the land flowing with milk and honey. I mean, that's spot on.
Okay.
To the extent, like, so with Ben Carson, it started with him criticizing Obama during the National Prayer Breakfast of 2000, I think 9 or 10, something like that. I can't remember. But he that's how he kind of came to prominence, specifically in the conservative realm, and subsequently became an enemy to the left, at least as far as.
And I remember that prayer breakfast. He did it with tact. He wasn't rude. He just basically said, "There's some things going on here that are probably more hurtful than helpful." Kind of like that.
Absolutely. And this, kind of brings it back to your my opening line, where I want to look at things objectively. I want to be able to criticize things that are not beneficial, things that are detrimental to human flourishment, regardless of what race you are. Does this thing equal our detriment or our benefit? I want to be able to criticize that openly in a tactful way, such as the way that Ben Carson did it. And whatever comes from that, be that as it may, if people call you an Uncle Tom, if people try to undermine you or sabotage you or discredit you, that's kind of the cost of standing on the side of truth. I mean, Jesus was literally crucified. So what makes us think that we're going to be treated favorably in this world for standing on the side of truth? And if you are a person who's being celebrated en masse for saying something, you should, take a step back and wonder, am I actually speaking the truth, or am I telling people what they want to hear?
Yeah, man, that makes perfect sense to me. One question that comes to mind. So I'm thinking in terms of if I was in the middle politically, or if I was even, especially on the left, I would probably hear a guy like you and be like, okay, he seems genuine. He seems like he's tried his best to learn history, but here's the problem. The history he's reading is wrong, because critical race theory and the 1619 Project, they've somehow like dug up these mystery history books that are giving the true history. But I don't mean to make fun of them, but I will say I think they would look at what you have probably been reading in terms of American history and say that does not paint the real picture. So you're developing your ideas on a false premise. What would you say to push back against those claims?
Because the history that I'm looking at is correspondence. The history that I'm looking at is the words of individuals who are responsible for creating the narratives that are prevailing today, if that makes sense. If the critical race theorist argues that, well, we are trying to correct history that has been revised, my argument is it is people from your flock who has been dominating the education space forever. And so are you revising it from yourself? Are you now saying, well, you know what, we changed our mind. Here's what we actually want to say. Because whether you look at for what they're trying to correct or what they're trying to put forth, both of those are wrong. Both of those are erroneous. The history that I'm exposing is, what is Blackness? Who has gotten to define what Blackness is historically, be it in entertainment, be it in history, be it in whatever facet, whatever realm you want to talk about. Who has gotten to define what Blackness is? It's the left. Booker T. Washington was a man who was born into slavery, who came and basically, catapulted Tuskegee into a space, a mecca of sorts, where people came and they learned to use their hands, they learned manners, they learned respect, not only for their country and their fellow men, but for themselves. He taught them entrepreneurship. Today, our schools churn out employees. It does not churn out employers. It does not churn out people who are going to go and be producers, but rather people who are going to be consumers and extractors. That's what our schools are churning out. Brain dead, people who think that they're smart, who think that they're intellectual, but really hate this country and want to see it destroyed. That's what our schools are churning out today. Booker T. Washington wasn't about that. He was about, you will be a respectful person. You will be a person of good moral character. You will be a person who produces, regardless of segregation, regardless of what somebody thinks about you. Don't worry about what people think about you. Be the best person you can be, build, and you will make America work for you.
Well, speaking of Booker T. Washington, and right now we can see this. I think I've heard that the two names of his era is, there's Booker T. Washington, and he had his way, which was basically, like you said, work with your hands, figure it out, go be productive. The other side would be W.E.B. Du Bois, right? And he ended up being an avowed communist. I think he left the country, all those things. But the left right now, who does have control of the education system, they're suppressing the works of Booker T. They're trying to remove him from the textbooks, whereas they are magnifying W.E.B. Du Bois.
The net result of Booker T. Washington's teachings, and men who think like him, is that of individualism and self-responsibility, right? The person who is individualistic in their, and their way of life, who is independent, does not need a demagogue, politician, entertainer, celebrity to tell them what to think or what to do and how to vote and what vaccine to take and so on and so forth. That individual does not need those so-called leaders. And so that is the purpose of undermining and sabotaging a Booker T. Washington. You don't want his mind to influence the people you want to have control over. Yeah. And so you need to lift up artificially men like W.E.B. Du Bois, who wants to convince you always to be angry, to integrate forcefully instead of, just letting nature take its course. Because if you're producing and this other person's producing and that other person's producing, you're black, this person's white, that other person's, Mexican or what have you, that you're naturally going to share space with each other through the free market enterprise system. You're naturally going to exchange goods and participate in trade and learn more about each other in that space. that was actually happening in the South. You know, what we know about the South today is that, oh, it was this hotbed of racism, and you know, you couldn't go there as a Black person without being lynched. Like, that's the story that we're told, and many of us still believe that to this very day. No, there was legitimate, genuine racial harmony going on between Blacks and whites, and not only that, but like, people still celebrate, both on the right and the left, the civil rights movement of the 1960s, not realizing that a lot of it was staged. Martin Luther King's church was in Atlanta, Georgia. What the heck is he doing in Alabama? He's going to these places and, you know, participating in this kind of agitation against Bull Connor and George Wallace and others who are legitimate racists. Don't get me wrong, but like, you're going and you're kind of poking the bear. You're making sure all the television cameras are set up in place to catch people who are sure to react to certain agitations. I mean, these weren't these sit-ins and stuff. They weren't happening by Blacks who lived locally in these places. These were people who were being bussed in, all to bring focus to this one area and attributing that one space to the entire South.